So at NKU, I majored in marketing, and there were really two consideration sets that I followed. One is just like, what am I passionate about? But also, and even most importantly, I think for people to consider is what are you not willing to do? Um, for one thing, I knew I was really passionate about like products in general, consumer products, and how they're marketed on television, what the packaging looks like, how they show up in store, like as weird and nerdy as that sounds, like that was something that interested me and what I was passionate about. And then, but I also knew what I was willing not to do, that I did not want a career that would impact somebody's life necessarily. So like I have a sister who's an ER nurse, and I have a sister who's a first grade teacher, and I could not do either of those jobs. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to actually like impact someone's life in that way, but through products that I know, incredibly smart people are designing to really help support and improve people's lives. On that front, like I'm more than happy to help support the marketing side of that. So that's, given my passions and what I knew I was willing not to do, like that's where it all kind of culminated into picking my my major. Sure. So I work at Procter and Gamble in the baby care division, and I specifically support the Pampers professional business. My job includes managing the Pampers professional budget, designing toolkits of selling materials, both for clinically facing audience, so nurses, pediatricians, and NICU therapists, all the way to the supply chain folks who are more concerned with the business side of things. And then I also help support tools that our scientific communications department will use at our professional facing conferences. I also work on consumer facing programs for the hospital. So things that a parent would interact with at the hospital and potentially take home with them to really help drive brand loyalty, as well as just working on nurse resources that we can provide to ultimately help the happy, healthy development of every baby. First, it started at NKU, where I had seen a flyer for the Success Way co-op program at Procter and Gamble. I was already a marketing major, and my passion, of course, as I mentioned, is really on just consumer products, packaging, the way they're marketed to people. And so seeing a flyer with brands I recognized, loved, and used, and that the company was headquartered just across the river, it really was a no-brainer. And so I interviewed for the co-op program, made it through, had an 8-month co-op experience while also going to school. And then from there, it was just, having that insight into what the corporate life would be like, what Procter & Gamble was like, really drove me to ultimately apply for full-time position there. So typical day and week, it's a mixture of the meetings that are, my regularly planned meetings, whether those are, because I'm on the professional side of things, so the hospital team meetings, monthly budget meetings, or just initiative meetings, right? So it's I think true of everybody at P&G is that you're kind of peppered throughout, the week and day with those standard meetings. And then also just having time to myself to kind of work through projects and keep things moving. Because of course you don't attend a meeting and then not end up having a list of things you need to go follow up on or go complete for the next meeting. So really, I would say from a day-to-day basis, it's like keeping up with my to-do list as well as managing the upcoming meetings and getting prepared for those. It really comes down to who we're supporting. So because I work on Pampers and because I specifically work in the professional side, I get to work on the diapers that support the tiniest babies who need the most support. And so I'll show these for the video, but again, this is our newborn size diaper, which most babies are born into. And then 10% of the population is actually born premature. And so this is the smallest diaper we've produced. And it's actually the smallest diaper on the market. that's ever existed for babies who are born even as little as less than 2 pounds. So knowing that I work on a brand that supports the tiniest fighters in the NICU makes me incredibly proud. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I can foresee, the traditional marketing role being very multi-hatted. So instead of focusing on like these maybe 5 ways or so to get in front of a consumer, and really hiring out the work to design those pieces, or to create the storyboard for the commercial, I foresee that a lot of that work will come in-house, and that we will, and not that agencies won't be needed or exist. I don't want to say that. It's more or less that we'll have to have a team that has all of that experience, and knowledge to make sure that they can support all those efforts, while keeping the consumer intrigued, and being able to react quickly given just how technology's changed, and it's not just appointment-based television anymore. There's lots of ways to get in touch with the consumer in real time. And so I foresee that there'll be a lot of kind of testing things and learning and constantly pivoting as technologies change. Yeah, so I think these really apply to anybody, whether you're at P&G or not, or in this field or in another, but really just a passion for improving anything, right? So whether that's a system, a way of doing things on the job, or it's even just what it is you're selling or working on. So like for us, it's products. So having a passion for constantly streamlining processes, finding savings and improving products, is truly needed. And I think passion in general, like leaps and bounds, takes you to where you want to go. I mean, even just from my personal experience, when I interviewed for the Pampers role, because even when you're inside, you'll still have to interview if you want to move into a different role, but internally, of course. So even when I interviewed, there were a lot of people going for the same role, and some people whom I knew from my co-op experience. But what ultimately, when he was explaining to me why he chose me over everybody else, he said it was my passion, that he knew, that I had it in me to like just take on whatever, because I came across as very passionate about it. So I think, just from that personal experience, I was like, wow, yeah, like that does go a long way. And when I've worked with you all on mock interviews in the past, like that makes a huge difference, because people may not know everything they need to know or have all the experience that you'd like them to have. But if they're passionate and show that they are willing to learn, then that changes the game. Which brings me into, some of the other characteristics, which is really that growth mindset of always wanting to learn, being helpful. So it's, especially when you start somewhere full-time out of nowhere, right straight out of college, you require a lot of help from others to learn, to gain their wisdom and kind of learn your way through systems. But then there comes a time where you are now the expert in that space. And so it is your turn now to be helpful and supportive of everybody else. And so that's an incredibly helpful characteristic. Really, and this goes without saying, I think, for anybody, but teamwork and collaboration skills take you a long way, as well as just that self-discipline to work independently. So I think, at least at P&G, they give you a lot of confidence in you to make decisions on your own, and then to bring decisions up to folks when we think it's needed. And so to really be able to work independently and feel confident in those decisions and take initiative to kind of keep things moving is incredibly important. So when you're in college, I would say it's through your career development or career services department. Since that's of course the way I got into P&G, is through doing an intern or a co-op, right? I think for most people who I work with, they all came through that route, because P&G is a hire from within companies. So it's not like we don't hire externally. But if you start at the bottom, obviously like they're going to be looking to you and your peers, right, to be promoted as your career develops. So that's one. And then of course there's pngcareers.com. So, and if there's, even if it's not P&G that you're interested in, and there's other companies, of course, they all have a website you can go to and really delve into like what all those opportunities are, just so you can kind of learn and read through those job postings to see what makes the most sense for you. Well, although my co-op experience really gave me an idea of like what corporate life would be like, what P&G was like, I'd say it did not fully prepare me for just how a brand is run. Because when I co-opted, it wasn't on a brand, or really just like what the workload could look like. In the variety of work. So like as I took on budgeting, for example, I wish that I had taken on some more finance classes in NKU, or even some entrepreneurship classes to really give me more experience and what that would look like. Because I think that would have just given me more confidence going in. But that being said, as with any company, you know, if there's something you need to learn, there's going to be a way for you to learn it at the company. And so fear not, if you've not taken a finance class, they would still be opportunity for you to learn either on your own, outside, or within the company. Really to like determine your passion and your values. I mean, there's jobs are jobs because they're work, right? And there's a lot of things to be done. And so they obviously, as an employee, they look to you to kind of lead those efforts and accomplish tasks and move things forward. And so I think what's really important is making sure that your passions and your values really line up with that company. So, and I think that's where the magic happens, right? So like for me, you know, I took business ethics classes and business law as part of my degree. But you know, working for a company that has a lot of integrity, isn't trying to like put fake claims out there to confuse employees or confuse consumers or anything like that, was incredibly important to me. And as I worked at just my co-op experience, so not even being on a brand, like that was very evident, that integrity and just, you know, providing consumers value was incredibly important to them. And so I knew both my passion and the values in the company were aligned. And then secondly, I think, you know, so those two things I think are important as you're looking to get into the field, but then also, you know, once you're in the field, I think it's really important to find a mentor, someone who's either within the company, you know, most likely within the company or outside, depending on where your passions are again, but with the company who can really help guide you. So they're not part of your direct line of report, but somebody who can really help, you know, give you that, be the sounding board for you when you're frustrated or you've run into any issues that you're trying to overcome, or really somebody to kind of help guide you on like, oh, okay, this is what you want now. Okay, here's some things I would suggest, or somebody who I'd suggest you meet with, or whatever, right? So it's like, it's helping with networking, and it's also helping really support you as you make that transition into the field. It's really to get involved in campus. So, you know, when I was at NKU, I was a commuter student. I didn't live on campus, but I was on campus a lot because I was super engaged with programs being offered right through the Career Development Center, through the College of Business, and then also through the organizations I was a part of. I think, you know, whatever that organization is, it's really going to open you up to, you know, not only just making friends, but really also with network opportunities, getting you in touch with people who are in the fields that you're interested in. So, for example, I was in the marketing club, I was also in professional business leaders, and both organizations really focused on having employers come in and kind of explain job opportunities, or other programs that they had that maybe I wouldn't have known about had I not been involved.